Welcome back to part 2 of the fix and flip mechanical repairs of this 2006 325 Xi. In the prior video, if you haven't seen it, we went ahead and took care of the front drive shaft that needed to be replaced, as well as the motor mounts, which are now mint and fresh. But, well, let me just cut to the I went to go get it inspected today and got the red R, meaning, well, not supposed to drive this car till I get it fixed. But what it ended up being is they found play in the driver's side front wheel. I'm pretty sure it's a tie rod, but let's jack it up real quick, check that out, and if it is, it's a quick and easy fix. And to diagnose, we're lifting up that corner of the car, placing it underneath, and what we first see is that the outer ball joint on the tie rod is not rocking back and forth. It seems to be tight and just fine, so we'll flip it to look at the inner tie rod, and as you can see right here, that is certainly got some play. Well, there you have it. We really need a new inner tie rod, and that control arm bushing in that second video is really showing that it should be adjusted and replaced too. There we go. Let's get our 24 millimeter down there. There we are. Ball joint is off. And that little trick you saw right there is just sliding a piece of metal in, re-threading the bolt. That's giving me a little bit less compression, making it much easier to spin the outer tie rod off of the inner tie rod. So now that that's done, we've got to go ahead and pull the boot off, which is going to gain us access to be able to see where we can get a wrench on to the inner tie rod. And with a couple ugga-duggas from a hammer, it's going to come loose. There we are. The old tie rod is out. I put it back together because I need to match this up to the new tie rod. And you can look here. This is what it looks like inside the car for your steering rack. Now, when we put the new one on, we're going to want to put it in to about 100 foot-pounds. So we'll need to use the same wrench setup that I was using before and get it plugged in and back on the car. Here we've got some metrics, however you pronounce it, arms. And these arms, or tie rods I should say, these metrics tie rods, these are actually out of Turkey, so this is going to have the new end to it. Nothing needs to be finished here, just threaded right back into place. We've of course got our new outer tie rod too. Figure while we're at it, we might as well do both. Make sure it goes through, and we're in good shape. Now, what I do want to do here is let's go ahead and line these two up and get them set to the same position. So after going back and forth, I ended up deciding to use a paint marker. That way I can put this on in the stages I'd like to, without fear of missing the size. So gonna get this all unthreaded because we do want to tighten it up and make sure it gets tightened into place with enough torque. Absolutely do not want our tie rod coming undone. And so our first step is going to be threading in the inner tie rod to the steering rack assembly. This is a little bit tricky because the new ball joints are pretty tight, so it's not quite as easy as just threading in a bolt. You need to get it lined up and then be able to accept a little bit of movement out of that inner tie rod. But anyways, it gets threaded in, and then go ahead and take your torque wrench or crow's foot, whatever you've got, to be able to tighten this up to proper torque spec. Once that's accomplished, we can then move on to installing the boot. The boot needs to slide back over. I'm going to use some zip ties to be able to get this snugged up onto the rack as well as the tie rod. But in an ideal world, we'd be using some of those metal clamps like they did from the factory. Now with the boot installed, it's time to thread that outer tie rod onto the inner. In this case, that's why I used that paint marker after lining them up with approximately the same length as the ones that were taken off. I'm able to thread that outer tie rod onto the inner, get it linked up into a position that is roughly close enough to go ahead and just drive the car down the road. Here we are, everything's connected back up. Still gotta, of course, put the castle nut onto the end, but not gonna lie, I was getting a bit frustrated, so I stopped videoing. But now I should be able to take that nut, begin threading it into place. And the frustration continues. This really just isn't playing nice with me. You don't want your impact wrench to be spinning the ball joint, so I'm going to have to go to the old school way, since there wasn't enough friction, of putting an Allen key in the center and snugging it up using my adjustable wrench. It gets it done, but well, I'll tell you what. I wish this went smoother, and in fact, I'd love to lie to you and tell you that it went smoother on the other side, but it simply didn't. This is over. This is done. The job's not hard. It's just fiddly. And along with the tie rods that need to be done, I've also gone ahead and ordered up some new rear brake sensors and some new Wagner brake pads, because the rear pad sensor on the car has turned to where it's showing an error, so those are going to need to be replaced. So we'll go ahead right in the back, pull these caps off, which are going to give us access to the caliper, sliding brackets, and then on most of these BMWs it's a 7, and so it is on this one too. Our spring off here. These brake pads actually look fine, but it's whatever. Alright, so we're going to push that piston back in. Okay, so that bottomed out. A little anti-squeal grease. In the end, what ended up being the problem was actually not the brake pad itself, but unfortunately I just was unable to get video or lost it or something of the passenger side. So on the BMW E90, the rear brake pads have only one sensor. It's on the passenger side rather than on the driver side. On the passenger side, when I was going through this process of inserting the brake pad, ended up discovering that the wires to the brake pad sensor had broken, triggering the light. So it wasn't actually a need for rear brake pads. As you can see, the pads and the rotors were both still within spec. So it got a new set of rear brake pads, no big deal, job done, and we're moving on. Next up we need to do is replace this power steering reservoir that is just downright disgusting. These plastic power steering reservoirs are known to crack and seep oil. It looked like this was having most of it come from the seal at the cap, but I figured I could just replace the whole cup fairly inexpensively with a replacement A premium power steering reservoir, and essentially it's just a hot swap. With the power steering, it would be best if you're able to flush the entire fluid, but in this case I'm going to be putting in fresh fluid, and in doing so most of the fluid will have been replaced. I did subsequently off camera go ahead and use a turkey baster, pull out the old fluid, put some new in, and that for the most part means that I've replaced virtually all of the CHF power steering fluid. And that's because when you're running the motor and turning the wheels side to side, it's cycling the power steering fluid. And so over time, taking some out, replacing it, you're going to end up with a mostly new power steering fluid. Well, anyways, as we finish up putting everything back together here, it's time for an update on pricing. In this video, we went ahead and took care of replacing the inner and outer tie rod assemblies, brake pads and sensors, new power steering fluid and reservoir, and off camera, we put on a new Dayco accessory belt. So that brings our total dollars into this BMW to be $2,328.47. Coming up in the next video, we're going to tackle some cosmetic mods, and those are really going to bring this from looking shabby as it has been up to snuff. Especially since we've mechanically sorted the vehicle, it's time to make it look nice too. Be sure to hit subscribe and join me to check out that video as well.